Have it at 2:45 p.m.
Grand Forks, East Grand Forks Wastewater Interconnect Advisory Committee, Monday, August 10th. Welcome everybody on behalf of myself, President Sandy, Vice President Mock, and Council Member Veen. Welcome East Side. Why don't we do a roll call? I guess we have Maureen here. She's over there. Todd, do you want to do the roll call or should I take care of it?
I can. Sandy?
Here.
Mock?
Here.
Veen?
Here.
Olsted?
Here.
Demers? Better.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Only two discussion items today. 2.1 Wastewater Interconnect Operational Cost Service and Rate Making Information Overview. Take it away, Todd.
Okay, thank you. We have also added the hydraulic study, so we're going to have a handful. I'm going to start it out. Maureen's going to give kind of the operations summary of how things have gone this last year. Sean Gaddy from A2S Nexus is going to do the cost of service rate making. And then I thought we'd pause. And then Al has a few overview slides to talk about the hydraulic study. And then we just hand it over to you guys to have some further conversations, if everyone's good with that format. One of the reasons why we're here, we do have an agreement with one another, and we usually time this around when we, in and around when we do preliminary budget approval in Grand Forks. We did do that on, we presented the mayor's budget on July 20th. We have preliminary approval on August 3rd, and then this time in between the 3rd and the September 14th, we generally have had a meeting like this to inform East Grand Forks as part of our advisory group, kind of where things are shaking out before we finally approve the budget that impacts East Grand Forks and the wastewater interconnect. I think what you're going to see later are some better numbers than we anticipated last year, so I think it's generally good news. Again, this has been one of a real success. We make light of being a wastewater interconnect project, but it's a real project. It was about, I think, an $8 to $10 million project, required 2 states to approve it, 2 cities working together, not only the operations, the financial, but the political, and it really was a remarkable project. So we first signed the agreement in 16. We started operations in 17. We've been holding these meetings for the last few years as we go over the successive years' financials as we move forward. And I think importantly, I'll have Melanie come up here. The real success of this project, other than getting political leadership together with our 2 states to approve the agreement all those years ago, has been the operations. And similar to what we do with the flood protection project between the 2 cities, this is really a great project of how operations staff from Jason to Melanie to Lisa and all the staffs work together. And it's a really great public works or waterworks projects when city council members or mayors don't know anything about what happens day to day. It's because they handle everything day to day. So a real shout out to what people do day to day with that. So with that, I have Maureen, and I know Jason is here, and Lisa is here from our staff. She's going to give the operations of how things worked this last year, and we'll kind of pause maybe if there's any other feedback on that, and then go to the cost of service rate making.
Thanks, Todd. So the 2 cities have an agreement between the 2 of us that talks about all kind of the ins and outs of this project. And then we have a permit so that we can work on an annual basis if we need to adjust the flow and what kind of discharge we're dealing with for the city of Grand Forks. So our current agreement allows for the discharge as seen here. It's the 0.94 MGD on an average day. And then we have a max flow as well, the 1.2 with a peak instantaneous flow of 1.5 million gallons a day. So in 2019, the average was 1.07 and our max day of 2 million gallons. That was mostly observed last fall. East Grand Forks, we were inundated with heavy rains last fall and seeing that come through in our wastewater interconnect. The large wet weather influences and higher strength loadings come from spring flooding wetter spring falls, like we just talked about last fall, and then high-strength influences. And Jason Stordal could talk a little bit more about that, but it's really sediment that we see from unestablished vegetation near their diurnal basin, if I'm correct there. So we just wanted to let you know that we do monitor. I'm going to get my details wrong. We sample once a month. And then we do work together if we see flows that are maybe out of the ordinary, so that we're not surprised when we get some billing and then information shared across, so that we can continually work on making flows better for both of us. The one thing I did want to highlight today is the 2020 revenue summary is there. We projected, so each year when we do this cost of service, we work with advanced engineering. Sean, I'll give you the details on 2021, what we can expect. But we did project a revenue flow with base rate of $477,000. And then our actual base rate is shown there. We were pretty close with that, $466,337. And then we have those strength surcharges, and Sean will talk a little bit about those too. But basically, if we see any BOD, the biological oxygen demand, the TSS, or TKN, those strength charges within that wastewater, we will charge out for those additional surcharge rates, mostly because of the cost of the expense for us to treat the water that comes in at those strengths. So that total revenue was the $669,472. The one point that I wanted to highlight here, and I'm speaking on behalf of Jason and Lisa, they can add to that as well, but in the actual agreement, the language says that we have a redundant sampling spot in East Grand Forks at the master station, and we've had some challenges. They've seen some challenges with that sampler just plugging and maybe not working properly. When it is working, we're getting kind of the same results, fairly similar results between the two samplers, but with the challenges that they've had there, and because it's a redundant sampling point, Jason has said that him and his staff have looked at other places they could place it and not really finding a good cost-effective solution. They would actually just like to eliminate that redundant sampling point. If we do that, we can have legal look at the agreement and maybe bring that back to both bodies to have that adjustment if this body would like us to do that. But it's presented some challenges for them, and I think we've got pretty good data that comes out from sampling that we're taking on our side at Master Lift Station 17. So that's what I have for the update there. Unless there's any questions, I'll turn it over to Sean and we can talk about what we can expect in the 2021 budget.
Thanks, Melanie. Maybe just the one thing I would point out on the 2020 revenue summary is, you'll see this in just a moment in some of the materials I have, but when we set the base and flow rate for East Grand Forks, we set them at what we consider to be a typical domestic strength wastewater. And just for the first couple of years, as Melanie pointed out, there's been a few challenges with the establishment of their equalization basin, which basically is a large grassed open area basin. And until the vegetation is established there, we're seeing just some sediment issues. That's largely driving up that annual cost for that sediment that's making its way through that Grand Forks has to remove from the system. So moving forward, we would expect and hope to see that go down. But it has been an influence driving up the actual rates charged to Grand Forks, to East Grand Forks. So similar to the last few times, and since we first established the methodology for determining the cost of service for Grand Forks to serve the city of East Grand Forks through their wastewater treatment system, we went through the same process as we have in the prior work. Really a three-step process. We functionalize the budget, we classify the budget, and then we allocate that budget to the users. And so generally what each of those steps are, functionalization is what are you doing? Are you collecting the wastewater? Are you pumping the wastewater? Are you treating the wastewater? Are you discharging it? East Grand Forks, from a functional standpoint, largely only really plays in the conveyance and treatment portions of that budget, and just a smaller portion of the conveyance. So there's a segregated piece to the analysis where we roll out East Grand Forks from a large amount of the costs within the overall budget to get to more of what are you directly benefiting from. On the classification piece, it's really what's driving that variance in cost. I talked a little bit about strength just a second ago, that biochemical oxygen demand, the solids demand that is placed on the system can really cause variations. And so what we do within the budget is we analyze and classify that budget to determine what drives variation. And that variation is how many customers are you serving, how much flow are you receiving from those customers, how much strength are you receiving from those customers. And then the last step is to allocate that based on those functionalized costs. So if you have X $100,000 in total cost to create biochemical oxygen demand, how much biochemical or BOD loading are you getting from each of your customer classes, and so on for each of the other allocation parameters, flow strength, and accounts and meters. So it's really, what are we doing, what drives the variation in cost of what we're doing, and how much are we getting from each of our customer classes, including East Grand Forks as a standalone class within the analysis. All of that, again, is based off what we call a test year budget. Each year we look at the proposed budget as Todd described in terms of what is the city of Grand Forks expecting to see from a total expense within their wastewater fund. We make some various adjustments to that, like I said, relative to what does East Grand Forks benefit from. If we look just at the bottom line here, last year our total test year budget from which we allocated costs to East Grand Forks was $11.7 million. Next year, we're actually looking at that being down about $900,000. So as Todd said, from our forecast last year to this year, the wastewater budget, especially relative to the benefit of East Grand Forks, is down. A couple big movers in there. One, there was some deferred capital that we were projecting for this year. That capital really was kind of across the board as the city is dealing with pandemic impacts like everyone else. There was some cash-funded capital that was deferred on pump station improvements and some improvements at the plant. And then also beyond that, there's also a large adjustment in here. You see the $1.1 million negative amount. That's a large cash-funded capital force main improvement that East Grand Forks doesn't necessarily directly benefit from, but in the small amount of force main cost that is allocated to you, what we have done is we roll out those big cash-funded amounts so you don't see big peaks and valleys in each year's allocation, and we amortize those out. So that's a big amortization amount in this year's adjusted test year budget for the cost of service. Across the remainder of the categories, I'd say there's generally consistent in each budget subdivision, from debt down to each of the collection, pumping, force main treatment items, just some more minor movement overall. So skipping from the front end, looking at the budget all the way to the back end on what are we allocating to the users. These are the user classes that we carry within the cost of service. So Grand Forks is residential, commercial customers, other industry in town. So there's a few large wet industries. You can see them there, Simplot, Ingredient, RRB. RRB is this year just starting up. You've probably heard in the news of some of their wastewater discharges to the plant. Rather large discharger with a rather large cost allocation to them, similar in scope and scale to the Simplot facility as far as the wastewater the city's receiving. As we include them to the analysis, that is also another big mover in this year. There's just more denominator to spread all the costs. There's more flow, there's more strength, and so everyone sees the benefit of that, including East Grand Forks within the analysis. And then down on the bottom there, you can see East Grand Forks' allocated cost on this year's $10.8 million proposed budget of $402,969. If you'll recall just a few slides ago, that value last year, all of your rates were set off $477,000. And so some positive movement from East Grand Forks' standpoint as far as where the budget is landing and the overall allocated cost. If we take a look at that quick and look at what it means for rates, on the 402,969, that comes through in both those standard base and flow rates that we establish each year. The customer cost component there, that's really driven by two main things. There's the general customer administrative cost within the budget, and then there's what is called the IPP portion of the budget, or the industrial pretreatment program. As a contract user with a IPP permit, there are certain costs allocated that come through in that base rate of the $1,921 per month. In addition to that, then the remainder amount of the 402 comes through in the proposed volumetric charge. So we take that amount divided by your anticipated flow. So on the average day basis at 940,000 gallons per day, that that flow ultimately drives a volumetric rate of $1.11 per 1,000 gallons. You can see how that compares to the last handful of years where we've established the rate, down about 20 cents per 1,000 gallons on the flow rate, and down a couple $100 per month on the base rate. You can see, again, how that has bounced too over the last couple of years as we've established the budget each year, and things have ebbed and flowed up and down in each year. But in general, overall, this year down a bit from last year. So I kind of pointed this out, a couple of things that are movement. One, generally the city was a little bit more constrained in their budgeting this year for the wastewater fund amongst the other funds, just given some of the uncertainties of the time that we're operating in. And then one of the biggest movers, though, overall, really is the addition of that additional customer in the new industry in Grand Forks. That really, on the base rate, took away a lot of that IPP cost that I just pointed out, and overall on the flow rate also helped drop that down, at least for the year 2021. So a couple of things causing that movement. And I can definitely answer any questions on that. I'll just keep going through this, and then we can ask those questions at the end of the presentation here. So each year, in addition to representing what is proposed with this year's budget, we also give a little look over the horizon, given plans that the city has for various capital improvements within the fund. That is the largest thing year over year, except for a really big change this year in a large customer addition. The other big thing year over year that changes that rate is what's happening with capital improvements and debt service within the wastewater fund. Both, we do make a projection, and we make that projection on the city's adopted or proposed CIP within the budget. And so you can see here over the next couple of years, as we look at the 2021 proposed value of $402,900, moving forward, we would expect to see some additional movement downward in East Grand Forks' allocated costs as the city prepares for some capital improvements more in the out time frame of the 6-year CIP. And so you can see 2022, 2023, we see some debt service coming off in the fund. Around 2024, you see that cost jump back up again. There are some things that are being contemplated. We've talked about them for a while. In terms of biosolids management improvements at the plant and some other wet facility process improvements. That is where you see that rate returning back to more where it's been historically in 2020, the $1.30, returning in 2024 to around $1.44 per 1,000, and staying relatively consistent thereafter based on what we know today within the capital improvements plan and the overall forecasted debt service of the fund. Like I said, what really drives a lot of that is the capital improvements. And as I mentioned, the city has deferred in 2020 and 2021 a number of those capital improvements items. This is the city's collection, pumping, and force main CIP that is currently proposed within the 2021 budget. You could see a couple of items here that I would point out. If we look specifically at sanitary sewer rehab, the city has chosen to defer that item in 2021 and then return to funding that in 2022 within the CIP. Another item you will also notice, if you look at the pump station rehab, about 5 line items down, that is about half of what the city would typically prefer to fund in that regard. And so that is another item that is being deferred over the next year at least, as we wait to see really where revenues shake out overall and where stability might land related to the pandemic and other revenue impacts of the city. Couple other items here that would be pointed out are items that I think you'll see that are typical every couple of years: pump station improvements, capital improvements, some force main rehab. That's another item that's deferred. And then the major item that I mentioned for 2021 that you saw the $1.1 million adjustment or amortization adjustment is that force main improvement on Columbia Road. Again, on the collection, pumping, force main components, East Grand Forks is only a very small percentage share of this, given how we have started out segregating you within the analysis and carried that through each year. We've updated the analysis. More significantly then, or more relevant to East Grand Forks, is on the treatment side of things, where we look at proposed CIP items, and a couple of these I mentioned just a moment ago. We are in 2020 here looking at The completion of a facility plan. We would expect with next year's budget presentation, the completion of that facility plan will provide a little bit better clarity as to exactly where we would expect those facility process improvements and biosolids improvement projects, the final costs to go, both cost and timing. So would expect to see some movement on this next year, but for right now, you can see how we are carrying some of those improvements in the 2022-2023 timeframe that are a little bit larger. The $5 million and $5 million, 22 and 23 for the wet facility process improvements, and then the closer to the 14 million out in that same time frame for the biosolids facility. There is one item, one larger cash funded item, which is lagoon decommissioning. We do have that amortized within the analysis for the small amount that would affect East Grand Forks on that component within the within that forecasted cost of service allocation for EGF. This is just a graphic demonstrating some of that movement in the debt service that is also influencing the rates. So you can see here as we look at where the debt service is at, close to $3 million in 2021, how that's projected to drop down in 22 and 23, and then how that's anticipated to be impacted by those CIP projects into the future. So just giving a little look over the fence on what we know today with some of the planning values that we're utilizing. And then another piece that is influencing that projected cost is the operations of those facilities. Most specifically, the largest uptick you're seeing here in the boxed out version, which is the treatment component of the operation and maintenance forecast, is to begin operations of that solids management, or that biosolids management facility. So that is the little orange additional bar there that comes along with when that project is commissioned and begins operations out in that 24-25 time frame. So with that, I think, Todd, you had hoped to pause here and answer any questions that we have on the cost of service and proposed rates for 21. And with that, we'll open. I'll take any questions, or Melanie or Lisa or Jason, if you want to step up and answer more of the operation components. We're here for that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gaddy. I think it's a great story. Two cities working together in two different states, coming together with a good deal that is needed with discussion only once a year. So that's been great. We'll let any questions on our friends from the east side go first. So.
I guess if I said anything, Mr. Mayor, it would be, to me, it's also a tribute to the front end planning that went into this deal to anticipate future growth, future infrastructure, future flows, for future strengths with just normal inflation over time. And really, that's how you can trust to go into a long-term deal like this that doesn't have a train wreck at the end in terms of cost for us or anything else. You're going to be sensible and prudent in how you build out your infrastructure, and then we'll just share in our percentage cost of that. So thank you again to all the front end work that went into establishing this deal that works for us short-term, long-term. Thank you.
One thing I'd like to say is, excuse me, I think working on this, when we started doing it, it took a long time to get there, and I think it's been going great. I appreciate everybody's hard work they put into it. You know, I think it's been nothing but good to say back and forth, and Jason and your staff has been, you know, like you said, if we don't hear anything, it's great. So, I mean, appreciate it and all the hard work everybody's done. So.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Veen.
I think the only thing I'd add is we've been doing this for several years now. It's always gone really well, and I think the explanations have been very clear, and it just works well. So thanks.
Vice President Mock or President Sandy?
Yeah, I'm actually morbidly curious how East Grand Forks bills their residents when the cost from Grand Forks fluctuates over time. Are you raising and lowering the cost to your residents over time? Or are you trying to maintain a reasonable flat?
We are doing our best to maintain that cost. We did know that there was going to be something coming up in the future, and we do treat our wastewater costs as an enterprise fund. So we do we're building up some reserves so that we can keep the rate as flat as possible. So we don't have to, like you said, have the big jumps from year to year. So yeah, we make plans for that, so.
Great. I'm curious, again, we've been through this biosolids discussion facility a couple thousand times. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly is the benefit to either the residents of East Grand Forks or Grand Forks, because all I see are increased costs. And I don't see where's the benefit to us for increasing the cost to all of our citizens for doing the plant?
I think the answer that we've deferred biosolids project for quite a few years, and right now our lagoons are serving as we'll call it the treatment of our solids, and our treatment lagoons are being filled up. And in a way to really narrow the scope of our treatment lagoons would be to have a mechanical process that would treat the biosolids, and a lot, like whether it's water treatment or wastewater treatment, every time you add more regulatory things that you do, it's going to cost us all more money. But it's a better long-term solution. I think the solution that we have in place now has always been interim. Interim has been for several years. Moving forward, I think the other part is we have to do a facility plan to identify how best to treat the biosolids that come off the plant, number one. And number two, we have a solid waste landfill too that we've been operating for the last 10 years, and that might be one of the, part of that old treatment process. So, but we kept deferring, knowing that it's never been the right time. And really, when you look at the year 22 and 23, I think we've been waiting for the debt service of the original wastewater treatment plant to come off so that we could then move forward with that additional feature to the wastewater treatment plant.
So at some point, are we going to see some sort of a cost-benefit analysis that'll show the cost-benefit of doing a biosolids over revamping or rehabbing our lagoons?
I think you're going to see all of that. So as part of the facility plan, we have to identify options with costs, both capital costs and operational kind of costs. So in what we've set aside over the next year or so, that we could go through that process, so the city council is really engaged leading up to, whether it's year 24, 25, whenever we move forward with that project. So there's plenty of time. We haven't contracted with updating our facility plan, but it'll have a range of options, and not just, the one-time cost, but also over time, what it may cost us. So more to come on that. We could delve into all the details, but we always want to forecast it out so East Grand Forks nor our own city council is surprised when projects start rolling out over the next few years.
I guess one thing I can say from the East Grand Forks side, and that was really the driving force, what pushed us into pursuing the interconnection with Grand Forks, is the fact that our wastewater treatment ponds were filling up with the biosolids, and it was to the point where we did not have much time anymore. Otherwise, we were going to be held back where we wouldn't be able to add any more commercial, any more residential. We would have been capped on that. So we had to look at what our different options were to treat that. So either expanding the ponds or the mechanical part of it. And I guess what we found is the mechanical, you get a much better long-term control of your biosolids than you do with the ponds. But yeah, I guess I think I give them I hand it to them for that they're looking at it now and making the plans they are, because that's what we ran into, is we just couldn't accept any more biosolids. Our lagoons were out of space.
Is that going to reduce some of the smells that we get in the summer, at least the risk for having to deal with that? I know it's a big concern.
Yeah, Mayor Buczynski, it will. The more we reduce the scope and scale, we have 1,300 acres of lagoons, I think 1,356 or something. So that will reduce that scope. I think the other thing, if you look at Red River Biorefinery, who's our RRB, I guess, is, they've loaded us up quite a bit. So thankfully, we have treatment capacity to take that on, because with that revenue comes a lot of pain from the industrial loading side to treat all that. And during startup, it's been, multiplied. And so as we move forward, in order to keep adding more commercial entities and residential and industrial, we've got to have the treatment capacity to maintain that. And I think in this case, I think the story, Mayor Gander, you talked about the fact when we said when Grand Forks would win, East Grand Forks would win, and we said that many times before your time. before both of the mayor's times, and there was skepticism on that. I'll see it when I believe it, and I think this is a demonstration that it did work out that way.
Yeah, please.
One more piece of all of this that I know has paid dividends for us is the feedback that you give on the strength of discharge. We've actually been able to go back to some of the larger producers and to the strength of their discharge and say, hey, let's take a look what you're doing here. We need to bring that down. You're adding to the cost. And if not, then we can carry the cost to them appropriately for the strength of their discharge. So all that feedback is important, even in real time, all the way back to those customers that are putting out that stronger discharge. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I only have one additional question. How are we paying for the engineering firm to do the study every year?
That's incorporated into our annual budget, so East Grand Forks is paying their proportional share.
Very good. It's always nice to see Mr. Gaddy here. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, we're going to move on to everybody's favorite coffee shop and water cooler subject the last 2 decades. Mr. Grasser, intercity bridge discussion, please.
Thank you. Good evening, mayors and city councils. You both had a presentation, pretty detailed presentation given to you by the consultant on the intercity bridge, so I'm not going to belabor any of that tonight. I'm going to touch on a couple of larger subjects and maybe provide some thoughts on the study and maybe what some of the next steps might be. Before I get into the slides here, I do want to note on the hydrology side of the world, you know, our flood protection projects were designed to the 210-year event is what it was defined at with the Corps of Engineers. Since that time, we've been in wet cycles. River's been high, flooded a lot in the recent past. If you paid attention to what the Fargo diversion was, they analyzed what they call the wet weather flow period, which is a shorter period of record than what the the FEMA has used to date. Under their analysis, our base flood has basically gone up a foot under that analysis. So our 210-year event protection is something less than 210 right now. When I listened to the FEMA testimony that they gave in some of the Fargo discussions, they're going to go back at some time after the diversion channel is probably in or operating somewhere in thereabouts and do another analysis basically up and down the Red River Valley, and they will use their own period of record. They're not committed to the wet period, but I'm a little concerned when they look at that period of record that our base flood may go up even from what the wet period of record came up with from the Corps. So anyway, I'm preaching some caution here, I guess, relative to what we think our level of protections are and what kind of elevations we can afford to give up and all those kinds of things. So anyway, I just wanted to get that in, because that goes across all the bridge elements and discussions. So with that, we analyzed 3 basic locations. You recall that, Elks Drive, 32nd Avenue South, 47th Avenue South. I won't say too much about the alignments right now, except on 32nd, that alignment, I'll have some discussion about that one at the end. What's actually pictured there is different than what the MPO, the original MPO modeled touchdown point would have been on the East Grand Forks side. This just gives you a quick graphic of what the high, medium, and low bridges mean. Again, you can see some of the graphs. Again, the low bridges in here would close at about 35 feet. In the neighborhood of a 10-year flood event, the mid-range bridge is about 49 feet. It gets us a little bit higher than where we're at now with the point and the Sorley. And then the high bridge would be 68 feet. That one just goes up and over the entire levee. Again, 32nd, similar type numbers relative to the low, medium, and high. Again, the low follows much more of the land contours when we get across the river. So again, similar closure type things. This one, the mid-level bridge, is we are thinking we can, about 49 feet again. So These would be open longer than the Point and the Sorley, but not as long as the Kennedy on the mid-range.
Mr. Grasser,
Yes.
quick question. When you say that it's at 49 or 54 feet, is that to the crown of the top of the bridge, or is that to the bottom of the structure? What is that height?
Well, basically, I'm going to refer you back to the closure period. Like on 47th here, we talk about the mid-range bridge. The top of the deck, I think, is really more, or let's see, that might be the bottom of the beams, I should say, on the mid-range. But we'll be closing it down earlier, basically about 51 feet, just because of the interactions with the closures. Because that's essentially about where the closure elevations are. I think this also anticipates 3 feet above the actual event. If the Corps of Engineers operating manual suggests or directs that we close 3 feet above or before the water actually gets to the closure point. That's just a safety factor. If the water is rising rapidly, we try to follow that 3 feet. If we think we're very close to the crests, you've all experienced that where we've asked the Corps to waive that, and we'll sometimes. But anyway, so that all of that works into this discussion about the closures. So the easiest one to look at is just where the likely closure mechanism would be. And of course, the high bridge, you're up and over everything. So again, this would be 47th Avenue South. Again, things look very similar. Closure about 39 feet, 51 feet, and 68. Again, low, medium, and high. The cost comparisons here, before I get into the numbers, I'll get into some of the numbers first, and then I'll give you some of my thoughts. You see in here some of the, there's basically 9 alternatives shown here, low, medium, high at each location. And I know we've struggled as councils and MPO members as to, we've got such a world of alternatives out here. How do we start narrowing some of those options down? And I'll circle back to that here a little bit later. But what we discovered in here really is that the low river alternatives, they had generally high costs of mitigation, and that's because at the lower levels they're just blocking so much flow in the hydraulics that you have to mitigate that. A lot of that mitigation would be excavating material to make the river flow more efficiently, then to offset the losses of the bridge, that type of thing. So you can see on the mitigation costs, you can see how those numbers bounce around, but they're all basically highest at the low-level bridge. Again, that takes the total cost of a lot of the different alternatives. It really starts to narrow the divergence from a low to a medium to a high. And so observe that. The other one that is part of the mitigation efforts, what we discovered is that some of the mitigation on these would require us to mitigate property that's outside the flood protection boundary. A lot of these are on the Minnesota side. In other words, there's rural properties out there now that would require a Corps of Engineer, FEMA-approved ring dike, might even have to be have some tie into operability of the rest of the flood protection system. So that all goes into that. I will point out that on the 32nd Avenue medium bridge, if you look at the mitigation costs there of $8 million, that goes back and ties into the graphic that we saw earlier. But what we discovered and what I would suggest is that on the 32nd option on the Minnesota side, we would either drop it inside the levee like the MPO had, or another option we talked about might even be placing it right on top of the levee, widen the levee. So you could basically eliminate those outside mitigation costs on 32nd Avenue South, and it would start to look more like the high bridge number. It would be higher than that, but it wouldn't be 8. So that number, we're in the process right now of trying to refine and define that with the consultants. So these numbers may change a little bit, but basically philosophically, we can take that $8 million and drop that number down by basically going back to some of the original concepts. So, some opinions on my part. If you look at these 9 alternatives, the low-level bridges are going to flood pretty darn frequently. There's not a ton of money to be saved on them. And so I think we've actually, under this study, probably eliminated the low-level alternatives on all three options. So now we've gone from 9 alternatives down to 6. The other one then, philosophically, if we have to mitigate properties outside of the flood protection boundary, I think we step into a whole new realm of complications, again, with property buyouts or some sort of levels of protections and things like that. That is a big step in my mind, again, in complications federally and dollar-wise. And so my thought is that I think we don't want to take that step. Now, that's an opinion on my part. If one would agree with that opinion, then we also eliminate the 47th Avenue alternatives, because they all have impacts that would start manifesting themselves outside the flood protection limits. The rest of them, if there are impacts, we can contain those impacts within the flood protection boundaries. And again, I think every effort would be made to make sure we try to get those impacts back down to zero. If you agree with all of that, some of the benefit of this study is that it has then taken our world of alternatives down to medium and high at Elks and a medium and high on 32nd. Now, that doesn't make some of the discussions and the decisions any easier, but I think there's value from this hydraulic study that helps narrow those world of alternatives. I think there's been value in that. Again, unless there's a champion that they disagree with some of my statements or assumptions. So with that, some of the next steps would be that we would, again, this was a pretty high-level alternative analysis on hydraulics. We could do some discussions more with FEMA and the Corps of Engineers on mitigation options and costs. We could even get into, some of the states, if we would need various permits for excavation, might be DNR, most likely on the Minnesota side. Again, we could have some preliminary discussions with property owners who may be impacted. The high-level bridges, particularly on the Grand Forks side, will all have property impacts as you bring, because you need to clear the levee, you've got to start your rise inside the flood protection boundary, and there's existing properties on both of those. I'm talking two now, Elks and 32nd. Both of those alternatives would have properties that would be impacted. So again, some more discussion, refining exactly what those impacts would be, and discussions with the property owners. Then there would also be some additional geotechnical considerations to see if there's any limitations as to what we can do with building, the approaches and things on the sites. Also, if you look at Elks Drive, I think there's some options and refinements we would need to do to maybe make sure we have access into the golf course. That location on the mid-range is pretty tough, because the benefit is that it comes right in essentially at the flood protection opening. But if you were to bring in the golf course road, you'd have a bad blind spot, an unacceptable blind spot where the road would come in. Tie into the bridge there, basically at the flood wall. If you can envision, you're at the flood wall and you can't see. So anyway, those are some of the refinements that we would look at on the alternatives. I know the MPO, I believe, has reserved some dollars in there to do some additional traffic analysis. We saved some by doing the hydraulic funding locally. We've freed up some of those dollars to look at some of the additional traffic impacts. But again, if we can do more detailed studies, if in fact we narrow things down from, 9 alternatives down into maybe 4. With that, I'll try to answer any questions. I'm still kind of the recon overview guy. If you get into a lot of details, I'm going to have to call up Mr. Walker, because he knows the details.
Thank you, Mr. Grasser. We'll start the same way. Councilmember Olstad, Vetter, or Mayor Gander. Who wants to kick it off?
Thank you, sir. When we had our overview of it and presentation here a couple weeks ago, I think when we talked about it, 32nd Avenue was a discussion that we had where it just didn't impact that area, it impacted Reinhardt Drive, where we had to look at the cost benefit of us having to do work on Reinhardt. So that was a discussion that I think we really need to take a look at and see if that's going to be even possible, because that's over a mile that we would have to raise or to do. Am I correct on that, Jason?
If we went outside the levee.
Right.
Yeah. If we did like Al's proposing and went on top of the levee or over, it would be a different story.
So if we went high bridge on 32nd, we wouldn't have to do anything to Reinhardt at all.
Not with those two, I guess, options as Al, we wouldn't have to do anything with that.
See, that's not what I understood when we had that discussion. We had to do something to that road.
Are you talking the outside of the levee, Mark? Or
Yeah.
Yeah, because we wouldn't be touching Reinhardt till the inside of the levee. Under those two options, the one that was given earlier, where we would come in on the wet side of the levee, and then we, coming up Reinhardt, then we may have to do something with that. But if we eliminate that option, we want top of the levee instead, then we wouldn't have that concern.
If I may, I think that's where the $8 million impact, I'm under the assumption at this point, the $8 million impact would be the Reinhardt Drive, which you're referring to as Reinhardt Drive
My
connection there.
understanding that was not factored in there. That was additional to our costs, correct?
Yeah.
So, well, given that, with our discussion, I think, speaking for myself, looking like Elks Drive is probably my preferred position of where this should go, and look at a high. I don't want to do low, I don't want to do medium. I want to make sure this thing is drivable and usable. If that's open and Kennedy Bridge is open, great. We can still move traffic from city to city. I think we just need to move forward and do something, so. But.
Go ahead, Mayor.
My concerns would be, I like that every study that we do hopefully is going to eliminate one or two options. And like you say, the hydraulic study here, I think I agree with some of your ideas that, yeah, it probably does eliminate some options. And the consultant also, his suggestions were that it eliminated some options. So my question is there another study, the next study that we're going to need to do anyway, that may eliminate another one or two of these options? And I'm thinking back to when we were doing all the floodplain stuff 20 some odd years ago. It seems that there was some discussion that, and I'm going to get the terminology wrong, bank slippage or ground slippage, that there might be one of these sites that isn't going to even support bridges anyway. And so if there's a study along those lines that would look at just whether we can even put a bridge at that site, that may eliminate a few more.
And that's entirely possible. That's the third bullet point down, is the geotechnical considerations. I don't have a recommendation right now which ones we should start with first, second, or third, how we would move forward through those. Those would all be policy discussions that we can have, more discussion on. But you're right, the geotechnical is part of that, one of those next steps. And they may or may not eliminate some options for us.
Go ahead, Mayor.
It's always a danger of running into the paralysis of analysis in all of this as we get wave upon wave of new information. And so sometimes I think we can even lose our way a little bit in the fog of information. We haven't talked too much about what are the local traffic objectives that we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to unload Reeves and Belmont, and we're trying to unload the corridor by Phoenix Elementary, a lot for safety in those neighborhoods, a lot for performance of intersections in those neighborhoods. And on our side is Bigland Road, and that's going very quickly beyond a safe operational level of traffic. And so it's all the redundant miles north and south that have to take place for someone to go from the south end of Grand Forks to the south end of East Grand, maybe to the lake or wherever they're going, or vice versa. And this bridge does show that it will get about 50% utilization on both sides. So we haven't talked too much lately about the traffic objectives, but that's the number one reason why we're considering this. And I know this is a different day right here, but if we're starting to boil it down and come to some sort of consensus, that should be still part of that conversation every time we bring it up. I like that we've always tried to look at minimizing neighborhood impact. We've met publicly, we've met privately, we've tried to get our heads around what's the best place for this. And you have some beautiful, mature, developed neighborhoods all up and down this river on the Grand Forks side. We haven't quite grown that far south yet. And we're mindful of that, you know, to really minimize the impact of these great mature neighborhoods, quiet neighborhoods with streets and kids playing and all. We want to be so mindful of that as we do this. And somewhere in there, of course, the hydraulics came in, and then the cost factors. And so, you know, let's really make sure, number one, that we're achieving our traffic objectives, which I know we are. We're inside a band of bridge corridors that achieve those objectives. And we can still be asking ourselves, does one of these achieve those objectives better than the other? I know in the past, one of the ways that 32nd started to shine from a traffic standpoint is it actually made the Kennedy Bridge a little lighter. Now to some that's an asset, to some it may be a liability. What does it mean? It means we may be diverting some traffic that would have gone around Highway 2 and across the Kennedy Bridge into this neighborhood. I don't consider that an asset, because our goal is a neighborhood connection that minimizes the impact to the neighborhoods, particularly on your side, because again, you've developed to that extent on the side of the river. And so the more it can feel like that neighborhood connection that we desperately need, the more favorable it should be to all of us, I believe. Why? Because the goal is to minimize the impact to that immediate neighborhood, one of the goals. And President Sandy, you and I have even discussed it over and over again, that is one of our top objectives, and we share it. If by chance, oh, and by the way, we won't allow trucks. If we cannot make it ironclad that trucks aren't going to use this neighborhood bridge, then I don't want to go. As much as I'm in favor of a south end connection right here, this is not a truck commercial kind of bridge, this is a neighborhood connection. Right? So these as guiding principles should be all part of the conversation. Again, I love it. I love this newest development, to Clarence's point. This bit of study right here was important and timely because the hydraulics absolutely come all the way back around to cost, and even come back around because of this mitigation idea to now how do we affect adjacent properties, which is one of our goals, is to minimize that. So it's good. And I guess I agree with also Mr. Vetter saying, are we going to do some more study? And if so, let's ask ourselves, what is that? And let's move as swiftly through those next phases as we can, because we really do want a plan that we can finalize and actually build before we're all pushing up daisies. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll let, want to go in the same order, Ken? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, after going through the whole process we did earlier, just trying to figure out, going through the MPO study and getting it to this level, we established that we needed to do a hydraulic study, in part because we didn't even know if hydraulically it was feasible to build a bridge. There's no use going through the next phase if you can't at least check the feasibility. So I greatly appreciated the outcome of this study so far, and that it does say that we can hydraulically build a bridge. Mr. Grasser, I have to agree with you a lot on the not mitigating outside the flood protection boundaries. I think we, in building our whole flood protection system to date, were very fortunate because we managed the system within our own city limits and didn't push the impacts of our project to the outside areas. You can see what happened with the FM diversion project and the lawsuits and the holdups and all of that, because they tried to push it outside their boundaries. And I think that helped us, it expedited the project and got us to where we are today. Also, having to go through a mitigation, and I'll be very honest and blunt about this, not working with the Minnesota DNR would be an advantage for us. Okay? And I say that because when they did the Fargo diversion, their issue was making sure there was zero impact at the Canadian border. They didn't care what happened in Grand Forks and East Grand Forks and other areas. And I don't agree with that. I think we got to make sure that we do this so that we don't have any impacts upstream or downstream, and not just push it that direction. So therefore, if we can do this ourselves internally, and you'll never not have federal or state agency involvement, but not to the point where we're going to have lawsuits and have to go through that process. So I think that your assessment at 47th falls within that realm, keeping it local, so a decision can be made. I think the other thing I'm glad was brought up was the geotech study, because you still don't know if you can, how well you can build one until you've done your geotech analysis. Now, obviously, you can build this whole thing on some type of piles, and you can still build it, I believe, but it's going to be at some expanded cost, and we would need to know what that cost would be. But for me, I wanted to do the hydraulic study, because if we could do one, I think the next study that has to be done, it's the pedestrian bicycle safety study. We wanted to make sure that we don't also create additional safety hazards. We solve one problem, but we create others. And again, I believe that there's ways to work within that study, those studies, but we need to do that plus the hydraulic grade study to find out which is the preferred next option. I'd also like to see us use these new costs and put them into the benefit cost ratios that the MPO did when they were doing their study. Because that we used the best, I mean, they were a consistent level of study, but they weren't to the accuracy that this study was. This gives us better data now to work on as what is truly the benefit cost ratio for this. So I do think it has to go to the next level of study, both the hydraulic study and the pedestrian safety study, to see that we can then incorporate that into the final determination. Should it be at 32nd or Elks Drive?
Vice President Mock.
Others have made good points, so I won't belabor any of that. Mr. Grasser, do you know, so in past MPO meetings when we've looked at cost comparisons, it seemed like the low option was significantly lower compared to the higher option, and I assume these numbers are a little bit more refined. But also as you go out, you know, these are today's dollars, so every year that this doesn't get done, you're multiplying it. Could we take these as proportional and use that going forward? So proportionally, we have an idea that it's about $5 million difference between medium and high. Is that the best way to look at those numbers?
Just looking at it, I hadn't thought it quite in those terms, but yeah, that's pretty close. I mean, between the medium and the high, we're talking, $5-6 million. If I can comment, I think to your point on the MPO study, what they were really looking at on that one was the length of the bridge. The bridge is kind of the expensive piece of the cost component, and of course a lower bridge has a lesser span. Sure. And so those costs of that bridge, building a road is relatively inexpensive, but the cost of the bridge is high. So I think that's why you saw such a divergence in that one, and then it didn't delve into the issue of any mitigation. So really what you're seeing in here is the mitigation is offsetting a lot of the savings in the bridge.
Okay. And if you did go with a lower option, there's a possibility you would have more flooding and therefore more maintenance costs to keep up with that relative to maybe a medium or high option?
Yeah, I think, I didn't touch on that, but yeah, I think it would go underwater more often. So yes, you would end up with some additional work that would go with a bridge that's underwater. Unfortunately, pretty regularly, the way we're having floods here the last few decades.
And most of the low options were getting flooded at levels even below the Point Bridge, I believe.
Yeah, we're talking a 10-year frequency, which seems to happen almost every year.
Okay.
Being a little sarcastic there, but it does happen very, very often while we're continue to be in this wet cycle. So again, I think all those kind of factored into my comments that I think the low options really, to me, I could kind of eliminate the low alternatives on all of them.
Mm-hmm. And do we have, so some others have touched on the geotech and the pedestrian. Do we also have traffic flow models to show, how traffic would flow if, say, Elks were put in, how that would affect that neighborhood? Or is that something that we would need to study additionally?
The MPO has done some traffic modeling on it. Again, I don't know how much effort it would take to get to the next iteration. As Councilman Vian mentioned, I think we would focus particularly on pedestrians and bikes and things, but really I think another refinement in the traffic alternatives might be good also. Again, and if you're really identifying two options, you can maybe afford to do a little more work on two rather than continuing to carry three. So, and the geotech is definitely, again, it kind of depends on how many of these things you want to run in series versus parallel, dollar-wise. The MPO, I think, will have significant dollars on the traffic side. The geotech and some of those others, I think, would end up with local funding again. And kind of intuitively, it depends which bridge you might want to go to. This isn't an engineering analysis, but if you think about the medium bridge locations coming out essentially at grade where we're already at, unlikely to have very much in the way of a geotech impact. The high-level bridges where you're building the road up with earth and whatnot, potentially on the dry side. And again, if you find out that that's not acceptable, well, now maybe your bridge goes farther than what you thought. So that's where some of the geotech would come into play.
Mr. Grasser, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. So, Mr. Grasser, to the best of your knowledge, is the MPO going to move forward refining their traffic analysis? As Mayor Gander pointed out, traffic mitigation is the reason why we're having this discussion in the first place. So, do you know, are you going to bring to the MPO the suggestion that we go back through the traffic studies and try to refine them?
I can certainly do that. I mean, there's other members of the MPO on here too, and testing, admittedly, my poor memory, but if I remember right, I believe the MPO does have dollars kind of essentially parked waiting for the additional traffic analysis to come. So I can certainly bring that up. I can talk with Mr. Haugen about it.
Okay. A general observation, just based upon the cost comparison, with the exception of the low bridge at 47th Avenue, which you've explained why that's so low, it does appear that bridges get cheaper the farther north we go. And so, again, I'd be one for getting more information than less information, simply because the cost benefit to pushing a bridge slightly farther north may provide the same mitigation of traffic, but may provide significantly less cost. I'll go back to saying we should have studied 17th, in my opinion, when we were looking at this. And really, anywhere south of 13th Avenue to the golf course, there's a lot of space out there. If we're going to put a bridge where it hammerheads against Belmont, where we have to do a roundabout or something anyway, we have all that space. If going farther north reduces the cost, I don't even know, maybe I'll say significantly. If the cost is significantly less with similar traffic mitigation, I think it only makes sense to look at that. I don't know how you draw a line in there. I don't know how our friends, the engineering folks that did these studies, because they had very refined spots to look at, I don't know how we could go to them and say, hey, you've got a quarter-mile of space or whatever it is, and try to figure out where's the cheapest place to build a bridge right there. Because, of course, there are considerations on East Grand Forks side, trying to tie into roads and we don't, similar to the way I don't want to have a significant negative effect on our neighborhoods. I know they have a neighborhood over there. I don't want to have a significant effect on your neighborhoods either. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm saying I would be willing to make a motion at Grand Forks City Council to approve another 15 or 30 grand to study another location just to see where the numbers bear, as long as the MPO is actually going to be looking at the traffic and the traffic flow at the same time, because the two will need to go hand in hand. To me, that just makes sense. And I don't know where you gentlemen what you think about that, but that's just food for thought. To me, there might be a reduced cost, similar traffic solution in there somewhere. I'm not sure. The only other thing that I was going to mention is, in light of the revenue issues in the state of North Dakota and most likely the difficulty getting a bonding bill out of St. Paul, I don't know where we are in terms of how quickly we could get funding for any bridge, Merrifield, or even if we're all on board with Elks. I do think, though, that continuing the studies so we can narrow down and get this, I think we owe it to all of our constituents to keep pushing forward to try to name a location so that everybody can plan for it. So I'm all forward. I'm all in on pushing to keep going forward so that we can come to some sort of resolution. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I think it's been no secret. I've kind of always pushed for the Merrifield Road Bridge, just as it's not affecting as many people. The trucks is what worries me more so than the traffic, is the beat trucks driving down to MERS at 2 in the morning when you got college kids walking around down there. And Elks Bridge, as you say, is not going to be a place to use those trucks. But of course, if you do one at Merrifield Road, we're talking 5 years from now, and then see how that affects traffic patterns, and then another couple of years to study and 5 more years to build the next bridge, and we're talking 20 years before we have a intercity bridge. Looking at these options here, Elks Drive appears to be the best option. I think a medium height bridge, if we're talking about trying to reduce the traffic, and not necessarily the flood, I think spending an extra $7.31 million, and I'd have to see how often we flood up to 49 feet, but if it's only a couple weeks every 5 or 10 years that we're going to lose a medium bridge at Elks, to me the cost of putting a high bridge there on not just the houses that would be affected, as you need to have that landing on the backside of the dike, but just the eyesore of a high bridge there sort of takes that one off the table for me. Of these three, certainly a mid-bridge at Elks seems to be the most cost-effective and the one that makes the most sense on what we seem to be wanting to do. To Dana's point, I think he's been an advocate of 17th and looking at that one. Maybe we didn't know 47th wasn't an option until we did this and we were able to cross it off, but I would have much rather had seen 17th, Elks, and 32nd in this study than throwing 47th, which really is a non-starter. I guess that's where I'm at. More information is going to help. I also, if the funding's not there and we do all this money for studies and we can't get the state funding, then we're going to have to do studies again. I don't know how long these hydraulic studies last, but I don't think it's more than a couple of years. So you have to get moving on something, or you're spending another $100,000 on this same thing in a couple of years. So it is time to do something or get off the pot. But like I said, I've always been a fan of starting with Merrifield Road, getting a lot of that beat truck traffic and other farm equipment and traffic by there, and seeing what kind of traffic on the south end is going to, of our city is going to head that direction. But that's my opinion.
If I may, one last thought. Not with all due respect, and I appreciate your opinion on the medium height bridge, as someone who spent the vast majority of his life in Grand Forks, and occasionally needed to get to East Grand Forks when there was a flood going on. I would much rather see us put the money into a high bridge so that we had a south end bridge similar to the Kennedy Bridge that's actually open during a mid-range flood event, which seemingly is happening every other year these days. That's my opinion. Whether it's at Elks or at 17th or anywhere else, I would rather, again, for the cost, to me, the benefit of being able to get across on the south end of Grand Forks is worth the additional money. That's just my opinion.
And of course, as soon as we build a high one, we'll never have a flood over 49 feet. But how often are we actually over 49 feet? I guess what do we actually lose? Does anyone have that readily available? How often? I guess let's just say in the last 10 years.
I'll take a stab at it here. I think we've only been over an actual 49 feet, just once or twice. Now, we may have closed earlier than that again usually the closures precede the 49. Although if I go back to this one, the 49 actually did have the 3 feet
Yeah, it's
head
got-
start on it. So
Yeah.
it's not very often that we deal with it in actuality. There've been some predictions that we've had to plan for considerably more than that pretty often. Knock on wood, we've been lucky the last number of flood years. Mother Nature's cooperated with us at the end, even if she didn't in the beginning.
Well, it's interesting. We've heard reports that we're going to have more flooding, and I've also heard that we need to be worried about the Red River drying up and being prepared for that. So we seem to be all over the map on that. What you guys have anything else you want to add?
Mayor, I got to respond to your last comment. I think it was 2012, we went from the 6th flood of record to zero flow or near zero flow in 1 year. That's the interesting thing about the Red River of the North. You have wide variability that can happen that quick. In a 30 style drought, it will be at zero flow. But very easily, in the wet years we're currently having, it can be quite high. So, and I do like the idea, I appreciate what I heard from Mr. Sandy. It'd be nice for us to settle this because we've kicked the can down the road for 20 plus years, and at least be able to identify a location so that people can plan for it. If there's mitigation that needs to be done, we can be doing that over a number of years instead of when it's more timely and cost effective than trying to force something to. And I also like the idea that Mayor Gander said, it's about, the traffic. We got to figure out how we actually look at it. So for me, whether it's at 17th, at Elks or wherever, where does it make the most sense? Where does it have the best benefit cost ratio? Let's use data for what's going to happen, which is going to be the safest for pedestrians. And we look at all of that information. That's what I want to look at before I would make a recommendation that we try to do that. So.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Just so you know also, Mr. Sandy, to your point of reconsidering 17th, I think it's a good idea. If that is something that you feel pretty strongly about, because to my memory, 17th achieves our traffic objectives very, very well. There were some other reasons why that one came off, but if it deserves, if 32nd has fallen off a little bit in its apparent appeal, then I think it is time to reconsider 17th. I will propose to our council and city administrator that if we go ahead with the hydraulic study there, that we share 50-50 as we did on these other locations. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Well, saving all that money on the interconnect, maybe they should pay for the whole thing. That's just my opinion. Any other comments, or are we going to put this one back to bed, at least for today? Oh. Don't know your name, sir.
This one's trouble.
If I may, I know my mayor doesn't like it too much, but I'm going to speak anyway. Dale Helms, Ward 2 Council, East Grand Forks. I'm going to restate my position on this bridge. I said before at the last meeting when we were all together that I will not vote for a bridge that's wet. It doesn't make sense. This has been going for 30, 40 years trying to come up with this bridge. And once this bridge is done, it's probably be another 30, 40 years before they do another one. So let's take the Thompson Bridge to the Oslo Bridge. We have 2 bridges out of those 5 that are dry, okay? So if we put another wet bridge in, now we got 2 out of 6. It doesn't make sense. We talk about spending the money. It costs too much to make it dry, but we can build a new arena. We can buy buildings, we can do whatever, and it doesn't seem like the money matters. So let's do it right. Let's do it and get it dry to start with and do it the right way. And let's make sure that the people that we're standing for is going to have a say and everybody's going to be happy. But the sooner we can get going, the better off we're going to be. Because I hope I'm on the council long enough to see some of this through. That'd be wonderful. But if not, let's at least do it right. I know it's more money, but like I said, it'll be another 30, 40 years down the road before they do another one. And who knows, the way we're going, it might be another 30, 40 before we get this one, if we don't get something going here real soon. So let's just get together and let's talk about it, and let's see what we can come up with the best plan. And I'm not saying where that plan's got to be. Everybody knows the cheapest way is a straight line from point A to point B. These bridges we're proposing, they want to put so many curves and turns and everything else in it, I can't see where that can be cost effective. So let's just get together and figure it out and do it the right way.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, I think that'll do it today. On behalf of myself and council members, thank you guys for making the journey over here.
Thanks for having us.
And until next time, adjourned.